So, I grew up with uncles. And that sounds kind of weird. But a lot of guys have stories they grow up with grandfathers. I didn't grow up with grandfathers. I grew up with uncles. And growing up with uncles is interesting because they're still guys, but they're not your dad. So they're very willing to fuck with you. You know? They're very interested in just how much they can mess up your day and then still make it okay to take you home to your parents. And the other part of this was that my uncles were on my mom's side. So they were messing with their little sister's son. So it was a win-win for them. What's she gonna do? Fight? So I grew up with my uncles. And it was my Uncle Ernie and my Uncle Clint. And they had a lot of fun with us. They figured out how to torment a child without ever having to worry about going to jail. Because it all turned out fun. And they mastered this by years of my older cousins. Like my oldest cousin, my group, we had family kids in groups. So like my older aunts and uncles, they had all their kids. And then by the time I was born, they were all in like their late teens, early 20s. So by the time me and my brother got around to being old enough to go out on uncle excursions, it really, they had a lot of practice. They had a lot of time to work on just how much you could mess with an 8-year-old and make it fun. Like, one time, my one Uncle Ernie, he would buy bottle rockets. And then, whenever my older cousins were little, he would just give them bottle rockets and tell them the houses to go torment. Now, by the time I was old enough to play with bottle rockets, my uncle knew he should come with us. So, we did a lot of, like, shooting bottle rockets at moving cars and finding his ex-wife's parents' house. All the things that you should do. Because it was a lot of fun. But my one uncle, he was a prankster. Like, whenever my brother was little, he went and he was in the city parade. And they were testing out getting ready for the city parade, and he had this bucket truck. And he took this bucket truck about 40 feet in the air, and then he had my brother up there with him, and he had my mom watching, and he was holding my brother over the side of the bucket, acting like he was going to drop him. Then he brought my brother back into the bucket, picked up a doll that was about the size of my brother, also wearing the same clothes, put him over the side, started throwing him over the side of the bucket, and dropped the doll. So that my mother could watch as what she thought her 3-year-old son fell 20 to 40 feet to the ground. And the whole time he laughed and laughed. And that was a little too far, My mom was not appreciative of that joke. So we figured out that it's easier to prank kids. Like, every time I'd have a sleepover at his house, I would wake up and he'd be wearing a trench coat and a gorilla mask standing in the corner waiting for me to wake up. So every day I got to wake up thinking Bigfoot was about to eat me. And I would scream, and he would laugh, and he would laugh. Sometimes he'd charge the bed. I remember a friend of ours was over one time, and he screamed, "I'm gonna piss myself." It's the only time I saw my uncle almost regret his prank. He thought he was gonna have to clean. But he was always dressing up as Bigfoot. He had a good mask. I'm jealous of it. I don't think they make masks that good anymore. But it was realistic and it was scary. Because it was just freaky enough. But not so freaky that any part of your brain thought, oh, that's a fake mask. It really looked like what you think Bigfoot would look like if he was getting ready to eat your child's soul. So it's just an ongoing theme. And as I got older, we got better. You know, you'd wake up and you'd be like, he's in the corner. I'm good. You know? And he had to get more creative. And he did. He did very successfully. Because he was a smart man. And the best thing he ever did with his gorilla mask, being Bigfoot, is he bought a ranch about 15 miles outside of town. And all of my growing up, he'd tell me stories about how he went out to the ranch and he found caves. And he went spelunking. He found Bigfoot's lair. Well, I didn't know any better. Sure, Bigfoot's in Missouri. Why isn't he, you know? Bigfoot can be anywhere. And this motherfucker talked about Bigfoot so much, if he wasn't real, my uncle was insane. And he couldn't be insane. He just throws straw children out the top of bucket trucks. How am I supposed to know? So he started taking us on adventures out at the ranch. And it was a lot of fun. We'd go camping. I remember camping, and it was got all the way down to like 3 degrees one night. We stayed out there and we roughed it. And then the whole next morning he told us about how badass it was. As little kids, we endured the elements. So it became so much fun going out there. Then one night we went out. We were going for a camp out at his ranch. And my uncle said, let's go on a walkabout. Let's see what we can find out here. And he hadn't known the ranch too crazy long. And it was I'd only been out there a handful of times. So we didn't know the place real well. So we went out. And he was telling us how he was trying to find this old grave. There was an old graveyard on this ranch he had found. So we waited and we had dinner. And we took off on a walkabout to see what we could find in the middle of the night. And my uncle told us before we left, now it's dangerous out here sometimes. There's a lot of animals. So what you guys should do is you all should bring pistols. And I'll bring mine. That way if we see anything, we can protect ourselves. Well, I was about 8 years old, and I said, well, fuck yeah, give me a gun. Give me 2. I've seen White Earp. I got this. So we went. We sat down at the bench. He said, well, you got to load your own guns. Because a cowboy always knows his gun. A cowboy's got to take care of his own gun. So we sat down. We loaded our guns. And he said, now you boys go over to the truck and get the flashlights. We took off. We got our flashlights. We came back. He said, well, boys, here's your guns. We put them in our holsters, and we took off on our walkabout. And we walked, and we saw things. And every once in a while, he'd ask us, hey, where are we at? Where's camp at? And I would say one way, and my brother, of course, would say the other. One time he'd pick one of us as right. The next time he'd pick the other. And then I'll be like, hey, where's camp at? And all of a sudden, we heard a loud rustle in the dark. And at first I thought, well, my uncle is probably going to try to scare me out here. But he can't, because I'm with him. And I'm watching him. And I got a gun. So, he kind of played it off. And we're walking around some more, and another one. Big noise. Me and my brother, we start worrying, and I was the younger brother. 4 years younger. So I didn't panic until he did. 'Cause not a bitch. And all of a sudden, we hear the big noise a third time. It sounded to me like a herd of elephants were in the woods in mid-Missouri. And my uncle just kept on telling us every time we heard a noise, guys, that's just a deer. Guys, that was just a squirrel. There's no reason to freak out. That third time, that big noise happened. Bang, pow, crash. Sounded like the forest was coming after us. My brother looks at him in all seriousness, all 12 years old of him. He goes, Uncle Ern, that ain't no fucking deer. My uncle goes, I think you're right. I think there's something else. We walk in some more. And my uncle goes, guys, where's the camp? I think I'm a little turned around. And I say, well, camp's right over there. And he says, it's not. That's east. I know we aren't supposed to go east. I didn't know what east was. I was 8. So I full on panic. I go, fuck, I'm lost. But I got a 6-shooter on me and I'm pretty tough. We keep walking and we keep walking, and we've been walking so long, I know we're lost. There ain't no way that this old fat guy that's my uncle is going to walk around this long. We have to be lost. All of a sudden, we're cutting through this trail, and my uncle's light turns onto a strobe, and there's Bigfoot just waiting for me. And as my brother scrambles to pull his gun and really starts just freaking out, I did the only thing I think an 8-year-old boy knows how to do. I started screaming, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, and I charged at him and started punching him as hard as my little 8-year-old arms could. Now swinging and hitting with all my might and telling him that I hated him, because Bigfoot was about to fucking eat me. And I was upset about it. All of a sudden, I realize my uncle has not blown a hole in Bigfoot yet. He's dying laughing. The mask comes off that I've spent so many years afraid of. And it's my other Uncle Clint who'd been hiding in the woods. And I'm like, what the hell is your all's deal? And my uncles, they're laughing and picking on us. Oh, my brother goes, you're lucky I didn't shoot you. My Uncle Clint looks at him and goes, oh, you couldn't have done that. All of a sudden, my brother pulls out his gun that we had loaded and brought into the woods with us. My Uncle Ernie laughs, and he goes, yeah, you got to check it for bullets to do that. Unbeknownst to us, whenever we went to get flashlights, he unloaded our guns and gave them back to us. So we were walking around with essentially a crown box, off on an adventure. And I look back and I respect that moment. Because I would love to think that if I was maybe a little bit older, even though the guns were unloaded, that if me and my brother had both pulled out our unloaded guns and started clacking them off at my uncle in a gorilla mask, how big the load of shit in his pants would have been. But it didn't quite all make sense. Because, like, my uncle wasn't that big of a guy. How was he making that big of a noise? So we went back to camp, and I was like, how'd you get here? You weren't out here. He's like, well, I drove. And we were like, how were you making all those noises? he had brought camping gear and a lawn chair in case he was out there for a long time waiting for us. So the giant noise that wasn't a fucking deer, Uncle Ern, was him falling in the woods wearing a gorilla mask, carrying camping chairs. And that's the most beautiful thing I can ever think of in my life. I've been Eric Biggs. You guys can find me on Instagram at Eric Biggs Comedy. Love you all. Good night.